Hi, good afternoon, everybody. This is Anthony Chang, CEO at Dogwood Health Trust, and let's just give folks a few minutes to transition from the main Zoom webinar into this breakout session here. And thank you so much to everyone for joining this breakout session. We hope to have more of a dialogue than just speaking at you. And we're looking forward to any and all questions that you may have. So thanks again for joining us, and please be patient while we just give folks just a minute or two to transition from the other Zoom call. Thanks, everyone. All right, great. Well, I've got my partner in crime, John, with me.
Hi, everyone.
And so we're happy to share, the couple of slides that were relevant to idea number one with you at any point. Either John or I could share those slides, and any other, we've got a few other potential visuals to share with you. But I thought I'd kick it over to John to see, John, did you have any additional reflections after hearing ideas 2 through 5 that you wanted to make sure that we shared with this group? And then fairly quickly, we want to open it up to your questions and make sure that we're focusing on types of details and information and things that would make this conversation relevant for you. So I'll kick it over to John to just kind of share with us any reflections that he's had in the past hour.
Well, a cross-cutting theme from the sessions is, or at least seems to me to be, that you need to start with where a community is at on this and respond to the things that the community cares about. Whether that's disaster preparedness for the next time, building up the supply chains that are important to your economy, small business support through a CDFI, or helping your communities access the disaster resources they may need to recover. Authentic philanthropy, it starts with where the community's at and builds from there. So that would be my reflection on what we've heard so far.
Great, fantastic. That's, I think, an incredibly apt reflection that helps synthesize, I think, a lot of the threads that came through each of the 10 speakers and the 5 big ideas here that the Aspen Institute is putting on the table here today. So with that, like I said, we want to save plenty of time here during this breakout session to make sure that this is more interactive, hoping that there's a brave soul among the looks like about 35 or so of you that have joined us so far. So thank you for joining us. And we'll see if this is either chaotic or fairly organized. Feel free to either jump in and we'll see how this goes, or we may ask you to use the chat function. And there's also a raise your hand function. And so feel free to utilize whichever one makes the most sense for you. And like I said, we'll try to move along at a good clip and get to most, if not all, of your questions.
And we're not just here about hearing us answer questions. I'm sure many of you have had experiences that would be valuable to share as well. So if you have examples, ideas, things that have worked for you, feel free to speak up.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. I should have. Thank you for catching that. Yeah, this is part of the dialogue is you have wisdom in working with your communities that we want you to be sure to share with the group.
Well, I'll awkwardly start it. I missed the first 2, so I honestly guessed that this by the title was probably most applicable. But if you wouldn't mind just taking a quick minute, maybe, I don't know if anybody else maybe everybody else caught it, but I would totally appreciate just a quick recap of your vision of this session. And then I think, you know, selfishly for me, that would make me probably say, oh yeah, I meant to be here. Yes.
Thank you, Athena. And would you mind just introducing yourself very quickly?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Athena Ardwig. I am in northeastern Pennsylvania. I work at NEPA Alliance, which is a community and economic development entity, but I work specifically there on a nonprofit and community assistance center.
Great. Welcome, Athena. Thanks you for introducing yourself.
I'm really excited about the topic, truthfully. Rural areas are a passion, so I couldn't have been more excited to have our own kind of spotlight. It's a different area than urban.
Yes, absolutely. As hopefully most, if not all of us on this breakout session definitely have discovered or already always knew in working with rural communities. So big idea number one, actually, John, let me turn it over to you since I feel like I've been doing a lot of the talking. If you want to do a quick summary of idea number one,
sure,
and then what we hope to get out of this breakout session.
Sure. This idea was really about helping rural communities and organizations learn about the available public and private resources that could be applied to recovering from the disaster. And once the resources are identified, then helping those communities and organizations succeed in doing what they must do to access the resources and use them well. It really comes down to, in many cases, a question of capacity. Rural communities are less likely to have specialized staff who work with grant programs day in and day out. Anytime you deal with a disaster and people in rural communities wearing many hats, the community has a variety of needs. Their job grows, and so does the paperwork. One of my jokes from my times working in disaster recovery is that the second disaster is deforestation from all the paperwork. And this is really about community foundations, other place-based funders, those with resources stepping up and helping pay for the capacity, whether it's something you do yourself because you're positioned to be the neutral convener that they can hire someone to work to coordinate response, or something that you fund to be done through your local organizations or communities. It's a good way of getting the capacity into communities to respond to the disaster. Oh, thank you, Anthony. Anthony, you're still muted.
I said, thank you, John, and thank you, Athena, for being the brave one to jump in with your first question. And so we're hoping there'll be a brave second person to jump in with any questions, or like John was saying, share. Hopefully there's something, some great practice or hard-earned experience that you'd like to make sure to share with the folks that we have here today.
This is Richard Taylor, and I'd like to share the experience we had working with a rural community in Tennessee. We're a software company that provides software for community coordination for disasters and other things. And in this case, that was a development district that was the anchor organization that was having a challenge with the opioid crisis, and that companies that they were trying to attract to their region were afraid that the employees would not be able to pass the drug test. And so they did what you all shared earlier in the session, is they hired a person that had some grant writing capabilities, and they were able to use that one person who was part-time to get a grant from the Department of Justice that actually funded a regional collaborative effort to help people that were having problems with recovery high relapse rates, and they were able to translate that into improving the workforce. And now that we have the COVID-19, we're talking to them about how we could also use that same approach to finding COVID-19 funding for all the people who have lost jobs in the region. And so that's just an example. It didn't take much of investment to hire a part-time person that knew how to write a grant, and they got a huge grant that paid for our software as well as paid for people to help to address that crisis. So just adding that to your experience as well.
Yeah, Richard, I think that's just such an incredible example. Thank you for being willing to jump in here early in the conversation and share that. And like I said, it's one of kind of underscoring this idea that, you don't need $1 million to attract $10 million, right? You can literally do, like you said, underwrite or even collaboratively share, a few FTE, partial FTEs, and just that investment can result in significant ROI for a rural community. I'll give you a very recent example. In the far west of Western North Carolina, very mountainous, very frontier, and to qualify for what are called HUD home funds, HOME is an acronym, typically you need a multi-jurisdictional, basically consortium to go after these funds. And there is a local match, but it's pretty modest, like about, I think DOG was investing about $80,000 for the initial match, but it'll draw down probably $6.7 million over the next 10 years. And, but that's not actually the main reason why it's being drawn down. It's, those 6 counties, when they became more aware of the funds and they started working together, they're the ones that said, okay, yeah, we can do this. And so, even if you didn't have that $80,000 as a funder to provide that local match, if you divide $80,000 by 6 counties, I don't know if the math comes out to, help me here, 12K each to begin drawing down those HUD funds for home repair and rental assistance and those kinds of things. Those funds are needed now in this crisis more than ever. So yeah, it doesn't take a huge amount of funding necessarily to do that. So thank you, Richard. And I think we had someone else that was about to jump in just as Richard jumped in.
I had a question, and sorry for the confusing name there. I'm actually Marisa Hayase with the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation. I'm the program director for the Hawaii region. And thank you, and thanks for the great presentation earlier. About 96% of Hawaii is rural, and a lot of our regions do not necessarily identify as rural and access some of the nationally based rural funds that are available. And we're small in comparison with our total population of about 1.2 million throughout our islands. With one of our most rural and remote islands having a population of just 6,000. So all of these sort of slim capacity challenges that you mentioned really resonate. And I'm curious about what you mentioned in terms of if funding is accessed, there's this additional need around data tracking, reporting, and would love to hear some specific systems and solutions, even if they're software and technology based, that have helped support some of the collaborative funding efforts that were successful, to continue to be successful with being able to track and then leverage those funds to hopefully get more funds in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. John, do you want to take a first pass at this one?
Well, I can't really speak to the technology side of this, but one of the things that we did when I was doing this work up in Minnesota was we didn't stop at the point where the applications were written. We continued to support the individuals that we brought in to help with the grant writing, to help set up the systems within those who were successful in receiving funding, to track and manage data and do the reporting. Now, you know, the story starts for us in 1989 when you couldn't do much with software. But, you know, over time, you know, initially we were talking about spreadsheets and things to track data. Today, there are applications in some fields. There are even dedicated software programs that have been developed for certain funding sources and to track the information necessary. But the point is, your job isn't done at the point where the grant is awarded, because the community has to have the capacity to administer that grant, report on it, collect data on it in order to successfully close that out and not have the dollars clawed back, as well as to position themselves for the next award.
Yeah, I'll just agree with all that, and then I think we saw a question pop up.
I can add to that, since we are a software company and our software is used to collect the data that you need to have, not only to report on the granting agency, but also to collect data on your impact, what impact you're having, as well as being able to determine operationally, you know, where the gaps are, and be able to track your performance. And so that's what we do. We offer a generic software package for any type of community-based project, and it is an important component, and that we felt like having software in the grant application for this rural group was one of the reasons they won a very competitive grant application, because they did include software as part of their solution.
Great. Well, you have a live example that there's, you know, solutions out there. I just want to underline something that John said, which is when you partner with rural organizations and agencies and stakeholders, and you know, it's a beautiful thing when that award comes in, and then you move to the next phase, and it's an incredible relationship builder, where they really see you as a value add partner, not just writing a typical grant check. And oftentimes the funding itself, especially if it's a multi-6 or 7-figure award, comes with the necessary funding to acquire technology, to hire that part FTE grants compliance person that then maybe a few years later they've done well with that grant, positioned to land yet another collaborative grant for their organization. And so then you're very much, as John is saying, helping build the capacity of these organizations to both apply for and then handle this significant amount of funding. And then of course a lot of times that infrastructure, if you will, like you're talking about, gets shared, frankly, across a rural community, across multiple organizations. So what I would say is, as you go down this route, as you potentially help your partners land significant funding, the nice thing is it tends to have this ripple effect in capacity building. And then I don't know if there was another person that was about to jump in, but we do have a few chat questions. And
I have a question.
Yeah, Veronica, why don't you go, and then we'll turn to one of the chat questions, please, Veronica.
Hi, my name is Veronica Womack, and currently I am the Executive Director of the Rural Studies Institute at Georgia College and State University. It's in rural Georgia. And I'm interested in any databases or any information about foundations that would be interested in building capacity. Right now, I'm located in the Black Belt region of the South, and a lot of the things that you're discussing we need, but we are at the very beginning stages. We don't have a lot of community-based organizations. We don't have the infrastructure to even apply. And so what we need is identifying people who can support us to be able to hire folk to provide the technical assistance. I think John Molinaro spoke to that. Appalachia, I consider to be our sister region, but they are about 30 years ahead of us in terms of building infrastructure of community-based organizations. And so we're at the very beginning stages, and we have no information or very little information about foundations that would even be interested in helping us to start building that infrastructure. So if there's anybody that has any ideas, we'd be very interested in receiving that information.
I don't know if, John, you wanted to comment on that? As he reach for the mute button. And while you're reaching for the mute button, what I would say is if you are in the very beginning of the stage, and then you had kind of a multi-part question there, but I'll just kind of address even just sort of step one, because we actually went through this about 6 months ago, as I mentioned on the main webinar, where again, we have a dedicated FTE, but you don't need one. People can just, you spend 2 hours researching, you spend 2 hours researching, like you can spread it out among the community partners, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for example, we had, 3 or 4 of our staff go onto grants.gov.
Mm-hmm.
And the grants.gov database has a lot of the federal RFPs, a lot of the states. I'm guessing Georgia has an equivalent for state issued RFPs. And then when we just kind of put the word out, we also tapped into the Southeastern Conference Council of Foundations, which is a regional philanthropy association that actually, I think is headquartered in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes they have a list of all the private foundations.
Okay.
And you can, again, say, why don't you take the A through F and I'll take G through whatever, and you just go look at their websites, and they'll have
Mm-hmm.
news and events, or they'll have RFP pages.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, in just a couple of months, in the very first month, sort of our centralized, and it was just an Excel spreadsheet with name, which area, was it Department of Justice, or was it Department of Education, was it Commerce, was it for broadband, what was it for, and then a link,
Mm-hmm.
and roughly about the amount of money, and when was the deadline. That was really an important one.
Mm-hmm.
We had, and it was just Excel, like we didn't use anything sophisticated, right? We had a list of about 70 in the first couple of weeks, and then, like I said, over the last 6 months, it's been 350 total. Not all of them are still active, of course, but there have been 350 total. So just on that piece, I mean, you talked about a lot of different pieces in getting started, but on just that piece, and even that kind of activity together builds some bonds of working together as a community. So I'll just start with that. John, did you want to jump in with anything else?
I have a
before we move
little
to
bit more.
Question?
I have a little bit more specific suggestion. I'm not sure if you know Felicia Lucky and the folks at the Black Belt Community Foundation in Selma, Alabama.
I love Felicia. Yeah.
Yeah, but they've done phenomenal work on taking a community in an area in part of Alabama in the Black Belt that's in the same situation that you're describing, and building the capacity. Their motto is take what we have to build what we need.
Yeah.
And they've literally done that. So I can't think of a better mentor for the efforts that you're suggesting that you need to get into.
Yeah, most definitely.
I would also suggest that there are no doubt corporate entities that have a local presence, and they're very eager to support the efforts in response to COVID-19. Everything from your banks, whether they're big or little, regional banks, national banks, and or firms like Big Lots and Home Depot and Macy's or whatever, all have philanthropic arms. And if they have presence in your community, you can at least get a foot in the door.
Marianne, would you let us know who you are?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Marianne Gelman. I'm the Resource Development Director at NCALL in Dover, Delaware. And if I might add, I've had a great experience. Most of Delaware, the great majority of the landmass, is rural, where, of course, most of the population is in Wilmington. And Dover is a town of 45,000, although it's the state capital. And we get a great deal, I would say at least 50% of our funding from corporate entities, mostly banks, since we do affordable housing and they have CRA obligations. And what I've discovered is I immediately contacted all of my program people and grant officers, and they were all willing, all of them were willing to do unrestricted funding or flexible funding and not be bound. They do have that authority to not be bound by the guidelines and restrictions and reporting requirements that are often on their websites or on their published materials. And they will say, yeah, use the framework that you typically use for the affordable housing things you do, but actually you can ask for unrestricted funding because you need that flexibility in order to keep the lights on or the employees paid or invest in technology or whatever it is that you need to do. So I have found them most receptive to that.
Thank you, Marianne. Anthony, you were about to turn it over to somebody from chat.
Yeah, and just a very, very quick follow-up to Marianne. We've also, in the last 10 years, I've found business leaders extremely receptive to all the kinds of topics that we're talking about. Just a second, Marianne, and especially, if you, if they underwrite either a grant writing pool fund or, to underwrite a partial FTE, because you talk about that ROI, right? That, they'll put in 25K or something to get going with some collaborative efforts, but it might draw down significant money. Business leaders really, that resonates with them. So, but we have a question in chat. There's about 4 or 5 questions. I want to make sure we hit those. And the first one is from Barbara. And I don't know, Barbara, if you are, you want to ask the question by phone. If not, I'm happy to read it out loud. Okay, so Barbara's on mute. I'll go ahead and Barbara, jump in at any time and introduce yourself. She asked the question in the chat. Do you have any examples of rural communities being able to leverage their opportunity zone designations to attract investment funds? And so not only want to open up any answers to that to John, but actually to the whole group. If any of you in your own work with your organizations or communities have an answer to Barbara's question.
In our experience across the third of Ohio that's Appalachian, and we've had quite a few opportunity zones, and we have had some projects in them, but we have not seen the opportunity designation drive the project. It would tended to be projects that were on a back burner or a side burner, where the little bit of additional impetus provided by the opportunity zone moved them to the front burner for those investing in them. So I really haven't seen a community be able to leverage their zone as much as I've seen the investors who are planning on doing things leveraging the zone to get something done sooner, or something that wasn't quite ready to go without the zone designation.
Mm-hmm. That's been my experience as well too. I was recently based in Eastern Washington State, also with a medium-sized metro area, but very rural around. And that was absolutely our experience, was kind of the shovel-ready projects were the ones that basically said, oh, well, this is a great, matchup, and they went forward. And though there were a number of players, partners who tried to take advantage of it from scratch, and just discovered that between raising the money essentially from private investors, right, who were, maybe they made 200% on Google stock and could, shield the gains. So you had to persuade investors, you had to meet the tax requirements. it was a pretty narrow thread when you could just, you know, probably do the same thing easier through non-opportunity zone opportunities. So for instance, we had partners that were looking at affordable housing projects, and it was easier to go after low income tax credit monies or new market tax credit monies than it was, frankly, to do opportunity zone. And so we are in Western North Carolina looking at one in particular for an affordable housing mixed use project. But again, when we compare to the other funding mechanisms, you know, unless we can't get those other subsidized monies, the opportunity zone doesn't present significant advantages for us as a potential co-investor as a foundation. Does anyone else on the call, before we switch to, again, some additional questions that are starting to stream in on the chat? Any other experiences that were positive on Opportunity Zone? And remember, you might be on mute. Okay, well, hopefully, Barbara, we maybe not the answer you wanted, but you got the honest answer. Let's do one more from the chat, and then we'll see if let's open up and keep cycling back and forth. So from Anne, actually, Anne, would you like to just ask your question live? And if not, happy to just read your question.
Hi, this is Ann Yeoman. I'm in Rappahannock County, Virginia. I'm the executive director for an organization called Family Futures, which is not quite a year old yet. We focus on children's savings accounts and financial education for adults and children, and more recently are doing financial coaching for residents who are in a great deal of stress as a result of losing jobs and so forth. I actually had several questions, but they're all kind of related. The first one is really about sustainability. So most grant applications say, so what's the plan to sustain this when you've used our funding? And I'm thinking that saying we'll get more grants is not really a sustainability plan. And so I'd like to hear from you or any of the other folks in this workshop about sustainability planning when you're talking about really starting up, leveraging something that's totally new, and you don't, A, have a long track record, and B, you don't have, shall we say, unassigned, unallocated funds really to play with. So I'm interested in the overall question of sustainability.
Great, thank you, Anna. Glad you jumped in and both introduced yourself and focused the question for us. Either John or anyone else participating in our breakout wanna?
Well, sustainability planning is so project specific in, you know, depending upon the field, depending upon the, you know, sometimes it might be a social venture, sometimes, you know, I have a friend of mine who runs the Nebraska Community Foundation, talks about it, their work as using a stair-step approach, where they use grant resources to get to the level to build their capacity and their fundraising to be able then to stabilize that level, and then goes after grant resources to do the next step. And that is certainly one approach, but you have to be thinking on the back end of, you know, what are the other ways of paying for things? And that is so different depending upon what the particular issue is that you're going out for funding, that I can't really give you general advice on it.
I can share our experience. You know, the question I usually ask for whatever your project is or your initiative is asking the question, who would benefit the most if we're successful in our project? And so those would be the ones that could provide those sustainability funds. Two examples, again, from the region we're working with is the Medicaid managed care organizations are 100% at risk for their patients and their members. And if you can reduce that healthcare cost for that health plan, they might be willing to provide sustainable funds. Another group are the jails. If you're able to keep the offenders from coming back, if you're reducing the recidivism rate that saves the local county government money if you're keeping people out of the jail. And so those are two sources of sustainable funds that we're pursuing in our particular area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll just double down on what Richard just said, which is typically we advise our partners who are, and like I said, we've funded about 40 applications in just the last 6 months, and quite a few funders, both public and private, want to know about the sustainability plan. And to the extent you do talk to stakeholders who are willing to provide, some of it's just grantspersonship, right? Where, the readers, evaluators who are reading all these applications want to just see, is there sort of strength of commitment from stakeholders? And sometimes it's the letter of support from a couple private funders, it's the letter of support from a department, whether it's Department of Health or Department of Commerce or whoever locally is applying, human services, that is saying, look, we are committed to finding a way. And do we have it in hand? No, because that's what we're applying to your RFP, right? Is to take this to a new level in our community. And so I think maybe some funders are unrealistic, but many funders, they're looking for that smell test, that sort of thumb in the air. Mm-hmm. Do we see enough commitment that we have a certain amount of confidence that should you succeed, folks want to continue this, right? Because obviously if it doesn't succeed, then nobody's going to fund it, right? So, but will you succeed? And then will you leverage that to get more funding? That was a great question. Thank you, Anne. Let's see, we have about 20 more minutes. And so just kind of want to be aware of our time check here. I did want to point out that on the question of opportunity zone funds, we had, I believe, Nancy posted some additional information in the chat. So if you're interested in that question and topic, be sure to shoot over to the chat and see. Thank you to Nancy for posting that. Richard, I'll let you do some of the moderating here. Either, let folks jump in or go to our next question. Oh, it looks like.
There was a question, Anthony, about whether folks have had experience with getting state dollars to help rural areas address economic impact of COVID-19. I can, and we'll let everybody share, but I can kick off by saying that part of our organization, we have a subsidiary which serves as a regional CDFI. And we just partnered with the State Economic Development Organization. And yesterday they announced that they'll be providing us $10 million worth of loan capital at 2% interest to allow us to help the smallest entrepreneurs in the region. Well, not tiny small, including tiny small, but the smaller entrepreneurs in the region access capital. Largely to restart their operations at very low interest loans.
Yeah, John, that's a great example. And I'll speak from the funder side. When we presented the case to our board, which is a brand new board, and said we could potentially provide capital to our regional, called Mountain BizWorks, CDFI here in Western North Carolina, and explain how it could supplement or even take advantage of the public funding that's coming down for small businesses and nonprofits, and actually for us, local FQHCs and community clinics. They jumped right on it and authorized a pretty significant, in our case, it was $20 million from our endowment. So just to clarify, and in fact, those of you who are not funders on the call, but you have your organizations and you have good relationships with either CDFIs or with funders, to even maybe plant the idea and suggest to them that they do something called a program-related investment, which is to use part of their endowment portfolio and not just own stocks and bonds and private equity, but to actually provide capital that gets a modest return to CDFIs or directly to businesses or directly for affordable housing projects. So that just might be something to think about, whether you're a funder on this breakout session or, like I said, you're in some other part of the community or ecosystem, to suggest that to private foundation partners that are in your region. So let's open it up. Go ahead.
Sorry. This is Kathleen Flanagan. I work for the Ford Family Foundation. We serve rural Oregon and Northern California. I'm wondering if anyone on the call has experience with economic development districts sharing grant writers across the districts. Many of ours have limited capacity, and so I'm curious if that could be a model.
Yes, this is Richard. The group that we're working with is a development district, and they're the ones that did hire the person that could do the grant writing. And they're trying to pursue writing grants for other groups in the region, but that's something they're just now thinking about because of their, again, limited staffing. They only have the one person and they're busy doing other things. But I really like the concept that a region, instead of each individual county and each individual community-based nonprofit tries to do it on their own, to pool their resources and find a way to have a regional grant writer instead of trying to do an individual grant writing effort. I like that concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can just share that in Eastern Washington, the critical access hospitals, there were about 7 or 8, got together and did exactly as you're suggesting. They weren't economic development districts, but they were, parallel, and they all co-funded according, sort of proportional to their revenue size, a full-time person. And that person, like I said, had this huge ROI, I think it was 20x, paid for themselves and provided some of that kind of critical, either discretionary dollar, there were mental health dollars that they went after, so on and so forth. We're working here in Western North Carolina with these what are called COGs, councils of governments. They're sort of multi-district, multi-county, where the board is made up of electeds, commissioners from each of the counties and mayors, and then the staff are paid for. And as we've worked with them, there have been some discussions about sharing a grant writer, but right now what Dogwood is doing is we're funding each individual application. And it's as low as just $2,000 for a grant writer for a kind of modest sized effort, up to, 20 or 30,000 even dollars for, a very complex federal application. But the average has been less than $8,000. It's been about $7,500. So I say that so that, an economic district there could potentially just say, hey, you put in 2,500, we'll put in 2,500. Let's do one significant effort together. And should this be a great experience, whether we get it or not, that could set the stage for doing a larger, FTE collaboration. So, yeah, thank you, Kathleen, for that great question. We have about 13 minutes. Oh, go ahead.
My name is Georgia Dimmick. I'm with Region 4 Development out of Twin Falls, Idaho. And we run a COG. And currently we have 8 counties and 39 cities that we take care of. So in our house, we have economic development. We have 2 grant writers. We have grant administrators. And then we also have an RLF program and a loan division. So we do both. But currently, we also have moved into helping another region that has 10 counties. And so now we have 18 counties and 118 cities. And so, yeah, when you say share a grant writer, that was interesting to me that you have individual, I mean, we have some cities that have their own grant writers, but most of the time we do that work for them and help them. But another thing that I started doing this year or last year was I provided grant writing workshops, and I went out into the communities, and we had anywhere from 15 to 20 people. So far we've done 4 of them, and we go out and we teach them how to look for dollars in whatever funding source it is. And then we follow up with that with another opportunity to teach them how to actually go through the process. We do it free. We do that as part of our community development. And so, you know, that just helps them become a better person, but it also strengthens us as being a cog. So thank you for letting me chime in. Sorry.
Georgia, so glad you're on this breakout session because, you know, you just captured exactly what I was trying to convey in 3 less sentences. So thank you, Georgia. That's great. Glad you're here. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's go back to the chat and let's see here. Anne had another question. Could we talk a bit about short-medium benchmarks? You're describing very long-term projects to achieve significant systems change, excluding pulling down individual grants for X years. Anne, I just want to invite you to reintroduce yourself and you know, any
Sorry, I
shifts in your
have so many questions and so few answers. So in our case, we're looking at a 13-year horizon before the first cohort actually finishes. But so I'm thinking about what do we use, or in your case, the various kinds of projects you're working on, which are in some cases fairly immediate, emergency, that sort of thing. But in other cases, it sounds to me like you're really talking about creating new systems or improving existing systems, partnerships, and that sort of thing. So from a funder perspective, it's one thing to say we're going to produce X in next year or 2 years or whatever. But it's a different thing to say in 5 years we're going to be here and in 10 years we're going to be there. So I'm thinking about, and you all are in different kinds of environments. So I'm interested in hearing examples of how you define the short and medium results. You mentioned a lot about being able to bring in lots of grants quickly. So that's one thing, but that's not really, that's kind of the straw for the bricks. I want to know, how do you describe getting the house built in terms of benchmarks? Okay.
And you're talking about, there is a conundrum, and you're absolutely right, when you're taking a long-term social change initiative and you're trying to show that you're making progress over things that take decades to change. The most effective tool I've seen for that is a theory of change, where you start with what your ultimate outcome is and you backward maps the preconditions for that, and then the preconditions for the preconditions, until you get to a level that feels like it's about the right level of detail. What you find then is you end up with a map that shows you what are the things that are necessary to be true for your end state to be true, and what are the things need to be true for those things to be true. And the further down that map you get, the more measurable things can get. And so the premise is that if you've got a good theory of change, a good roadmap for what it takes to achieve your outcome, those earlier preconditions are things you can measure as progress towards your final outcome. That's work that Janet's group at the Aspen Institute has done with various organizations around the country. I did it for a while when I was working there with her. It's a very effective technique. It takes a group of people who are experienced in the particular area and who've done some thinking about it to sit down over usually several sessions to really work through the details. But once you have it done, it's a tremendous roadmap and a very good way of making sure you're not overlooking something critical to your effort.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and second John on all of that. For example, when I was in Eastern Washington, we had an overall initiative around complex trauma and ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. It was a multi-pronged kind of theory of change or strategy, which included multiple sectors like, addressing ACEs in the education K-12 system, addressing ACEs in the child welfare, CPS, foster care system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there were many times we went after significant funding with our partners where, again, we were providing the grant writers or we were providing a local match, or sometimes we weren't providing any extra money. We were just saying, we've already committed $250,000 to this initiative over here to reduce disparities in school discipline that are disproportionately affecting children that are acting out because of ACEs or complex trauma. And sort of tying that story in, if you will, about, yeah, here's our goals just for this RFP and this component, but here's the goal over here for this component and the goal over here for that component. Here's the 1 year versus the 5 year, and this is how it all ties together as a community. And as John was saying, that can be very compelling to other funders that's being thought out, and frankly for the partners too, to know that they're not just sort of one one sort of silo, but they're about a multi-pronged, multi-collaborative effort. And I will say that, yeah, just things like how much that ROI on how much money is coming in from, but that's just a proxy for capacity building, right? That's just a proxy for resources that represent impact, but what's the actual impact? Did you reduce out of school suspensions? Did you reduce the number of kids in foster care, as a community and as a set of partners? So we have about 5 minutes left, and I'm trying to think here. My apologies to folks that have been posting questions. I think we've covered quite a few, or people have jumped on and actually answered some questions. So a big thank you to this group. I feel like we've had at least half of the folks have jumped in to help answer the questions, which is exactly what we had hoped for. So thank you so much for that. We have about 5 minutes left, and John, with your permission, maybe we could just do a quick round of maybe closing checkouts or reflections on this session. And I'll just kind of go around and call, and you can either like I said, we only have about 5 minutes, and there's about 30 of us. So, and you can pass, but, and then John, I'll give you the last word. So Veronica, any closing thought or reflection? Oh yeah, and remember to go off mute.
Yeah, I'm just very excited to be part of the group and start learning about things that are happening around rural areas. I feel like oftentimes the rural South is kind of left out of the discussion, and I'm hoping to change that. So if anybody has any information that they think I would need, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Veronica. Wonderful. Richard, any closing reflection?
Yes, I just want to share a quote: never let a serious crisis go to waste. I think the COVID-19 is an opportunity for you to seek funding as well as support for some initiatives that needed to happen well before COVID-19 to help improve inequality as well as economic vitality and prosperity for regions that have been hurt or have not fully recovered from the last recession.
Wonderful. Thank you, Richard. Love that quote. Georgia, any closing reflection from you?
I just appreciate the networking opportunity and speaking to those across the nation. That is nice to see that we're all in the same boat, but we're always going for the same goal. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Georgia. Kathleen, you posted some helpful things on the chat. Any closing reflection from you? And you can pass if you want to.
I think I would echo what Richard shared. The COVID-19 has highlighted disparities in rural among people of color, and it's an opportunity to address systems change.
Great. Absolutely agree. Thank you, Kathleen. Great closing reflection. And let's see here. Trying to remember who else. Anne, you contributed a couple questions. Any closing reflections on your part?
I do have to say, when people talk about rural, or when I talk to other projects that are similar to mine, and they say, "Oh, we're rural," and I ask them what their population is, it's 10 times what mine is. So,
yeah.
But this actually speaks to something Veronica said about staying in touch and sharing information. Will we be able to get participant contact information so that we can actually continue these conversations with individuals?
Great question, great idea. And I don't know the answer to that question.
It might involve some kind of permission from individuals or something. But.
Right. Tyler, hurry up and take a screenshot of who was on this breakout. And we lost a few folks, but maybe, again, we'll ask permissions, or ask the Aspen staff to somehow ask permission. And I think that's a fabulous idea. Only, I forget who it was, said, Richard, give me your contact info on the chat. That was the only smart person. So yeah, I think that's fantastic, Anne. Great idea. And we'll see if we can't ask our Aspen colleagues to follow up on that. And we have about 1 minute left, and we want to be respectful to stay within the bounds of our time here. Is that right? I just want to make sure I got the timing right.
That's
yes,
correct.
Thank you, Tyler. So John, you get the last word and the closing reflection.
Well, I'm glad to see that people are interested in connecting and meeting again. We have a little bit of a saying in Appalachian, Ohio, that the solution to your problem might be on the other side of the mountain. You just don't know that it's a few miles as the crow flies away from you, and that happens all over rural America. So really appreciate the opportunity to have people share here today, and I'm hoping that as a member of the Rural Development Innovation Group that help put this together, that we can find some other ways to bring people back together for similar conversations in the future. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Hey.